I worked in adoption for many years. I worked with birth parents and adoptees, and I would work with women in their 80s, birth parents who placed their child for adoption, coming to talk about their grief in their 80s because there wasn't the support when they were pregnant and younger. So what that brought to them in their lives to be able to tell someone. And sometimes I was the only person, or the other counsellors on the team were the only people they'd ever shared that with. That's powerful. I mean, that's amazing. And for people to do that, and that's why it's never too late.
Hey there, welcome back to Good for the Hive, the weekly podcast where I get to speak to a wide spectrum of inspiring individuals to share their life lessons and take a look at the question, what is a good life? In this week's episode, I'm joined by Órlaith Sheill. Órlaith is a grief, fertility and perinatal counsellor with over 20 years experience in the field. We talk all about what led Órlaith into such a challenging role, how she keeps going in such a tough space, and her mission to get us all talking more openly about grief. If you enjoy the conversation today, please do hit the like button, and if you're new around here, do subscribe. The more likes and subs that we get on the channel help us to continue to attract inspiring individuals just like Órlaith to share their wisdom with us. So let's jump into the episode. Órlaith Sheill, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
We'll start this one where we start all of our episodes and ask you, what is a good life to you?
Big question. And I think to answer that is a very subjective response. So thinking about that, I feel like it's a very personal response, and I feel in this time in my life, a good life for me is health, is peace of mind, is feeling grateful for my education, feeling grateful for the work I get to do. I live in a great country in Australia, Sydney, Australia, feeling grateful for the lifestyle here and the opportunities. But I think the biggest thing for me about a good life is turning the noise down on comparing myself to others, turning the noise down on I need to be in a certain place or doing a certain thing. And I don't have that perfect, but definitely adjusting that noise.
And adjusting that noise, is that something you've learned and you can see in your younger self that you weren't doing to the same level that you do now?
Absolutely. And I think the more confident I get in my career and my work, the more I see, I work in trauma and grief, the more I realise the importance and the value of certain things and what's worth worrying about and what isn't. And obviously I'm human, so I'm going to feel human things and have anxieties and worries, but really just, taking check, seeing what is important and knowing that in my own lived experience, but also working with clients and really just appreciating life more and knowing the fragility of life through my work, but also knowing how short life is, and what can I do in this short life? What can I do more of, and how can I best use my skills? And I think that's playing more into what is a good life.
So was that time within your field that helped you deal with it sounded like a little bit of imposter syndrome when you first got into the field?
A little bit. Yeah. And don't get me wrong, that imposter syndrome is still there. It's just keeping it in check. But yeah.
And how do you deal with that? How do you balance that in your own head?
The imposter syndrome. And that it's a normal response, like that it's natural. Everybody has it on some level. Sometimes it's louder, sometimes it's quieter. I guess even coming on here today, just working on that, I wanted to do it, but I didn't want to do it. And I thought, what have I got to say? What have I got to give that's of value? And then I had a very wise person remind me of my years of practice, my education, my experience working in this space, and my own experience of life, and that nobody else has that. I have that. So I can talk to that and I can bring that forth. So I guess just seeing what that imposter syndrome is about. I actually think it's a good motivator too, to think about, do I need extra training? Do I need to read about something? Do I need to research it? So I think it's a good check, as well as having to manage it, to move past it, to expand and grow.
It's interesting if you think of a boardroom setting where you've got all these CEOs and each one of them has a level of imposter syndrome, but they might not show it. And when you empathize with what other people are going through, you realize, oh, you're no different. You're just going through the same thing that everyone else is. They might be covering up. You're
Yeah,
probably covering up better than you think
yeah,
you are.
yeah.
But yeah, it's not always coming across to them.
And just being human, like
Mm.
admitting that some things are scary, some things are, you think you're not able to do it, but then you do it, and it's another learning. So yeah, the imposter syndrome was definitely louder. It's still there. It keeps me humble. It pushes me, but it's also, I don't listen to it as much. I just do what I need to do and get on with things.
So now, as we sort of alluded to, you work in the massive field of grief. Can you talk us through how you got into this field in the first place?
So, long story or short story, I guess to summarize for here, I've been in the field over 20 years, and it hasn't always looked like grief, but there has been a theme of grief throughout my professional work and my training. And I just noticed it more and more over the years. And I suppose I've had quite a different upbringing, a culturally different upbringing, an unusual childhood in the sense that I think I'm fourth generation undertakers. So I grew up, yeah, I
Right.
grew up in a family of undertakers, and that's what we knew, what I knew. And I think if I think about my career, it really stems from there. As a little girl, I lived in a small community in Ireland, and the door would knock, and my parents would always make sure that if you were running to answer the door, be careful or be mindful, that could be a funeral. So I would open the door, or my brother would open the door, and we would maybe meet a friend, or it might be someone who was grieving and was coming to ask my family to do their funeral, which, when I think about it, is such a massive step for any family to have to walk up to our front door and do that. And as a child, we would bring them into another room to wait for my parents. And we would be polite and sensitive, and we knew innately, we had to be warned, but we knew innately that how to be kind and how to be sensitive, and that grief was part of our lives. So I think there's that experience, which is a core memory and part of my life, and something I'm really proud of, and proud of my family. But it was also a conditioning. Like, I learned to be with grief. I learned to be with people who were grieving. And I probably didn't see that pattern until now. And then it just followed right through my life. And I suppose when I think about it, it was very personal, but it was also abstract as a child. But when it became personal was when I experienced a tragic loss in my life that became really personal. And my brother died when I was 24 and he was 22, my only sibling. And he died suddenly in his sleep. And that for me was life-altering and is life-altering. And I think the trajectory of my work and study and interest really kind of not spiral, but went from there in a very clear way.
That's an incredible experience to have in your 20s. Going back to 20-year-old Orla, did you know about what was life like then? Was there a talking therapy option? Was there just family around you? Is this what you went through there? Has that led to you wanting to help others when they inevitably go through what you had to go through?
I mean, I was extremely fortunate to live in a rural community that literally wrapped their arms around our family in his death. So, and Irish culture does grief very, very well. We do rituals very, very well. We celebrate the person beautifully. So that was incredible and very moving, and to be supported. And we also support our grieving, not particularly the first month and the first year. And we have rituals within that time frame. So I felt really supported, have amazing extended family and friends. So, but as in my 20s, I have this vivid memory of he died in the winter. And I remember going back to Dublin, where I was living, to work, and I remember the loneliness of trying to find support, trying to find a group that wasn't bereaved widows or bereaved parents, but I was a bereaved sibling, and there was no such group that I could find. There was no internet. There was no, well, there was, but you had to go to a cafe. But there was, there were really limited resources. And I did eventually find a therapist who was life-saving. Like, I was so lost, and she was incredible in Dublin. And I didn't enjoy going to the sessions at sometimes because I had to really feel my grief and work through it. But it was a real lifeline for me. And I know the power of that. Like, that just was a lifesaver for me to learn how to be in the world again, with my brother not being here. So I feel emotional saying that, but
of
I
course.
think what drives me every day is that somebody doesn't have to walk the streets searching for support, that support is available and should be more available. And I'm a real advocate for not leaving people bereaved alone. It's such a lonely, agonizing experience that people need to be supported. And our world is grief illiterate. We're not great at talking about grief. We might be good at the funeral, or we might be good around the time, but we're not great at sitting with the pain of another. We don't know what to say. We don't know what to do. We want to make it go away, and we want to fix it. And I think we need to start talking more. And I think there is a shift coming. I see it. But we need to start talking more, opening up these conversations and sitting with the discomfort. And it's the most normal reaction in the world not to want to feel pain, especially if you're seeing and experiencing someone else's pain. If you care about them, you want to make it okay for them. But actually, how we make grief okay, how we make it tolerable, is allowing the person to share it and feel it and work through it and learn how to live life with their grief. It's not going to go away. So, yeah, does that answer your question in some ways? I think it's more complex than I've just explained, but that kind of, I hope, gives you a vision of where I've come from personally and professionally to do what I do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what was the gap that you had to deal with the grief ostensibly alone until you found a counsellor that could actually speak to you?
And friends.
And how long did it take until you found someone to talk to?
Thankfully, I had very proactive parents who insisted that I got support as soon as possible. So I think I can't remember exactly, but I think it was a couple of months.
Okay.
And I remember at the time, a priest saying to me, I remember being in bed and the pain of that grief and not wanting to get up and see the world. And I remember the local priest ringing me and saying, get out of that bed. And I remember saying, I think I need support. I think I need counselling. And he said, it's too early for counselling. You don't need counselling. And I remember, I'm still to this day, can't believe he said that to me. But I remember in that time being shocked and thinking, I know what I need. You don't know what I need. But my parents were very wonderful, and my friends, like, they held me up to be proactive in getting that support. And my parents also accessed their own support. So, yeah, I was very encouraged, but there were no groups. And if I didn't kind of pursue that support, there would have been a gap. I actually went and made that happen myself.
And all of this while your parents are supporting you, how were they dealing with it? Did they cope with it? Obviously, everyone's individual, so presumably there was a difference in how they coped with it, and then supporting you as well. That adds another layer to what they've got to deal with to keep the family going.
Them. Yeah, me supporting them. I mean, their grief is unimaginable. It's parental grief, and I think when you're a surviving sibling and the only sibling, your role changes in the family. And I was really mindful of their grief, and they were really mindful of mine. But I think I'm really, on some level, grieving now for him, because I think I have permission to grieve now for him with what I know, with the theories I know, with the practice I know, with what I've read, what I've experienced. And I think it's more acceptable to grieve a sibling now. There's more information out there. There's more dialogue. So I think prior to that, I probably put it away, or, and also I was in my 20s. You just want to, it's such a shock to the system, and you don't know how to be, but you also want to get on with life. So I think now I'm really acknowledging how hard the sibling grief is.
You touched earlier on the Irish community and they grieve well. I wasn't sure if I could ask the question of how different cultures grieve, and is a healthy relationship with death the best precursor and the best way to help a community grieve, because everyone's got to go through the same thing at some stage. So there are definite differences culturally in who grieves well and who doesn't. Are there ones that just close off to it and do the least healthy thing, and therefore they actually extend the grieving period?
It depends on your religious beliefs. It depends on your spiritual aspect, if you have any. It depends on your culture. It depends on the community you live in, the environment you're in. I think they're all factors. When I say Irish do funerals well, I say that with pride and knowing, but I'm also really mindful of the how that does lasts or doesn't last, or how that is for some people and not for others. And grief brings up such complexities in families, in relationships, in communities. It can be really challenging when the funeral is over, when the memorial is over. And I suppose when you think about cultures, I don't want to say good or bad. I just think we are hardwired to grieve, and we shouldn't do so in isolation. We should do so collectively with support. And that's the best way to learn to be with your grief, is in the support of others. And because it's lonely enough, it's harrowing enough, it's isolating enough. So yeah, I don't think there's a good and bad. I just would love more support for people.
Okay. Now, your role as a counsellor, so it's not just this side of grief that you do a whole spectrum. Could you
I do.
talk us through the different aspects and the different fields that you work in?
So I kind of see my role divided in the sense of, I work in the space of grief and trauma. I work in fertility and fertility grief, including pregnancy loss, and support in subsequent pregnancies after loss. And I also work in the perinatal space, which is through pregnancy and in the first year of a child's life. And you might think, well, how is there any grief there? But in the perinatal space, but that can be non-death losses, such as we're a couple becoming parents. How do we do that? Where I'm a single person deciding to have a child on my own. How do I do that? Letting go of freedoms, letting go of the life that was, navigating, transitioning to being a parent, taking care of somebody else. So I deal with a lot of non-death loss as well. So when people hear about my job, they're like, "Oh, you're a grief counsellor. That's a tough one." Or I've had other comments such as, "How do you do that every day?" But my role is amazing because it's about death loss and non-death loss, and helping people through change and transition in life. So that's kind of how I see my role. And I've made it that it includes those other areas, because to do grief all the time and trauma is not sustainable for me in my role. So I need to make sure that in order to have a long career of quality and to be sustained in this work, that I need to be mindful how much grief and trauma I absorb. So it is good for me. I teach, I work in the perinatal space and the fertility space and the grief space. And that helps me stay buoyant and energized, and, to have, I want a long career doing this.
I mean, fourth generation undertakers, you've grown up amongst it. Your house was the shop window knocking on. So you've been around it for a long time. And like you say, naturally that sort of EQ of how to deal with people, how to talk to people, and then how to rationalize it in your own head of what they're going through, what this is. Because there must have been an age where people were knocking on the door and it didn't quite make sense. You just knew what to do and you were sort of going through the motions. And then the sense of, oh, okay, this is actually someone in our community's gone and this person's going to be around for a little bit. That is quite the upbringing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it definitely informs my work, and it definitely provides a framework. And, it doesn't mean I haven't been impacted. I have been greatly impacted, particularly in our community. with deaths that were close to me, and it became really personal. And that was really, really challenging for my community and my friends and myself. But I think what I learned was that death is a part of life. That doesn't mean I like it or I'm okay with it on a human level, but it allows me to do the work I'm doing. And yeah, that dialogue is quite natural for me. I'm okay at sitting. I'm good at sitting with pain and trauma because I see the difference it makes. I see, like I had a client, I was just thinking about this the other day, and I've seen this client 3 times in the last couple of weeks. And the difference in the physicality of this person, in the energy of this person, that they have a place to go with a traumatic grief when they didn't know how they were going to cope with it. Now, I've held space for that person, allowed them to express, helped them with some of the normalising of grief. What's normal, what's appropriate for them, what's, supportive to them. And they've just walked out going, okay, I can handle this a bit better now. That makes sense. I'm not going mad. I'm actually experiencing a normal response to something that's really tough.
And you've helped with that, and that is so powerful.
That's what drives me, because I can actually physically see the difference in this person.
Have there been stages in your career where you can feel the toll that it's taking on you, and you felt that you had to diversify a little bit just to keep your head in the game, otherwise you might not have continued with it?
Yeah.
How did that feel?
I think particularly through COVID, that was really tough, because we were collectively grieving for our sense of freedom, our worry, our health concerns. People were dying. I think that was really challenging personally for me and professionally. And I think that's when I've always taught, so that's been there. But I think I really made a conscious decision to, as you say, diversify, to, remain buoyant, to be able to give this the energy I need. And I have really good support systems. I have peer support. I have an excellent supervisor. I have mentors I can lean into. So I'm really resourced. I have great friends and family, and I see that really as important in helping me with this work. I'm not doing it alone. I may be doing it alone in private practice, but I'm not doing it alone, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely does. Absolutely does. So how do you see your role as a counsellor? What will people experience should they have to come to a grief counsellor at one point in their lives, which most people will do?
Or may not. That's the thing. Some people may not. And that's okay. Maybe they have enough resources in their world to navigate and cope with their grief. Do you mean what can they expect, or what is it like?
It's mostly around, because I have to say I have not experienced grief myself. I've seen it very closely, but I've not been through it or anywhere near. It's more your role, because understanding with other things, if we're looking at neurodiversity and we're looking at counsellors that do other things with other people, and the parents or the people that are in their lives, they just want to fix that person. They see, that person is not functioning normal. I want to fix them. It's hurting me. So I just want to be able to fix them. And they take on that. But I want to understand, is your role presumably is not to fix someone, it's to help them deal and be able to live in what they're going through and feel their feelings.
Absolutely.
And this is me from a complete, I have no idea what it looks like and what your role includes.
And I'm not superhuman. I can't fix it, right? So, but I often use that kind of thinking, or what I call magical thinking, where you might say, if you had a magic wand, what would you prefer it to be? Or if we had a silver bullet, what would we change? Like, what is so hard about this? So that can be helpful to get a sense of what the person wants their life to be and not where they are. And getting a sense of who the person was before their grief, because that can get lost. When they turn up in my space, they can often be so traumatized and grief-stricken, you don't know who the person was beforehand. And that's really interesting to know who that person was. And then learning to, how grief is impacting and trauma. Is it impacting their nervous system, their body, their work, their thinking, and their relationships? So gathering information about all of that is really important and key. And normalising some of that, because our brains don't function as well It's grief fog is a thing. It comes back online, but people get very frustrated at work, don't feel like they're performing well. So actually being told that's a normal response, what can we do to help you with that? So something as simple as making lists every day, putting reminders on your phone. I see my job as reminding people of their appointments or booking ahead and having some structure so people have a framework. So just little things like that can really be helpful. Talking about the psychosocial side of grief, looking at the theories can really be helpful with people, explaining what to expect in grief, normalising and saying, yeah, does it sound like this, right? That would make sense. You would feel that way. Why wouldn't you feel that way? So it's really a collaborative approach, and seeing how people are taking care of themselves or not, seeing how they're responding. Are they eating in a way that maybe is not helpful? Are they drinking alcohol or using drugs in a way that's not helpful? Are they numbing their grief? Are they over functioning because they're grieving? Are they not wanting to feel at all and going to do things that aren't helpful? So just really working in that intense period around that. And I'm really about finding their own strengths and their own resilience and working from a strengths base perspective. So, and really congratulating people because they're amazing. I mean, their whole world may have been turned upside down and they're still able to get up in the morning. They're still able to have a shower. They're still able to attend to their kids. They're still able to go to work, and if they're not, that's okay too. But people amaze me what they can do, but they might be really hard on themselves. They might feel like they're failing, that they're not coping. So my role is about resourcing. It's about making them feel that, that this is an acceptable response. This is a normal response. We're supposed to do this when we lose something that matters to us or a person that matters to us. We mourn, we grieve.
And because that's not normalised, obviously people don't know what they're meant to be feeling at certain stages. Do you get some clues of where the person is in their grief by how they come to your door? So if it's self-referral, or if they're being told to by friends, or if they're clinically being told to seek further support, does that tell you a little bit before they've even walked through the door of where they might be at this stage? Is there a level of the grief where they just have zero self-awareness and they wouldn't even think that they might be able to seek professional advice?
Most people I see are willing engagement in counselling support. And if a partner rings me or a parent and says, can you see such and such, I will always make sure that the person they're concerned about calls me, because it's not going to work if that person doesn't want to be there. So it's really important that that person gives themselves permission to engage in support, that they allow themselves to be supported. So,
and is that a
really
huge
important
turning point within the level of grief? Do you see traits that happen across a timeline, which will obviously vary person to person, but is that a huge turning point of asking for help and having that vulnerability? Is that a huge milestone that they have to get through, that everyone will have to get through if they feel grief at that level?
It's very brave, courageous. It's wonderful that they do that, and I would always acknowledge that. The difficult part, and yes, I do see a pattern, but I also see relief. Okay, I went to see a counsellor and it wasn't as bad as I thought. A lot of people are afraid, like, what's she going to do? So it's lovely when people go, oh, that wasn't as bad as I thought, or I was really worried about coming here today. I was so nervous and it was grand, So, and thank you for helping me. And would you like to come back? I would. So that in itself is a shift, right? But then I guess when people really go into the hard work of grief and feeling it, sometimes they don't want to come to the appointment. The hard part is actually turning up for the appointment, even if they're engaged in support for quite some time. If they're doing well at work or they're doing well in their world and they kind of don't want to feel it, coming to me is calling it up, is feeling it. And they might, which is hard, but sometimes they'll have that big cry, maybe that they've been holding on to for a couple of months or a couple of weeks. Or they might say, I didn't know what I was going to talk to you about today. I thought I was grand. I thought I was doing great. And they're emotional. And I say to them, it's not that you're not doing well. You just needed to release this. You held this in because you're functioning in the world, and maybe there was nowhere to go with this, and you pushed it down, and then you released it so you can go back out into the world more resourced, lighter, and able to keep going. So
It's one of those old adages. It's asking for help isn't giving up, it's refusing to give up.
yeah,
And
absolutely. And I think there is stigma still about, if I go to a counsellor, what does that mean? But actually, it's a great gift to yourself to go and give yourself time and space to work through and make your life a good life, as you asked at the beginning. Like, can you have a good life after experiencing trauma and grief? When you're in it, you think never. You think, I can never live again, or I can never have that life again that I had. How can I live with this? But people do, and there's always hope. And people amaze me with what they navigate. So to give themselves space in a counselling session to be supported, heard, and connected is vital, and validated in their experience.
And how passive do you feel people can be when they're going through grief? Will time eventually heal all wounds, or is there a level of active engagement that people have to talk to you and open up to get through it? Or if they just sort of do their own thing, they will eventually find a peace with it? What do you feel
I
about
think
that?
there is definitely a natural process. I think it helps if you've got guidance in that process and there's shared conversation. Time heals all wounds. I struggle with that line, that platitude, because a lot of people grieving are told that, you're going to be fine. You'll move on. You'll find closure. Time heals all wounds. The platitudes, they're said in the most well-intentioned way, but they're very minimalistic. They minimize the grief and they dismiss the person. They make the person stop talking. Like if you say to me, tell me about your grief, and I say, time heals all wounds, are you going to continue that conversation? You're not. So I guess, does time heal? Time helps you integrate. Time helps you get used to living with grief. But grief is a lifelong experience. And we now know there's a concept called continued bonds. And we now know that healthy grieving is about having that continued relationship with the person or what you lost. And, it's not about closure and forgetting and fixing and moving on. It's about coming to a place of integrating and learning to be with and having a continued relationship with the person that's gone. So that might be having rituals, that might be doing something on their anniversary, that might be coming and talking to them with me. Maybe they've nowhere else to go with the stories and the memories and that shared experience. So yeah, it's not linear. You asked me about clients, and time. Clients can come to me for an intense period of work and then go away, and then they'll come back, and they'll go away and come back, because something might happen in their lives. Some change has occurred, another loss has occurred, maybe in a non-death way or in a change way, and then they feel the feelings and think, I need to get some support with this. So yeah, it's an open door for
So you
that.
do experience delayed grief where maybe the feelings have been pushed right down and it doesn't rear its head for many, and after that amount of time, it might be quite hard to realize what you're going through and why you're going through it, because there is that time gap between what has happened and how you're feeling now. And if you've just managed your feelings in that way, even making the association can be quite difficult, I assume.
And it's never too late. Like delayed grief, well, if you feel at a time in your life, I'm ready to look at this, or this is really impacting my relationships and I'm noticing that, or this isn't serving me well, then it's never too late to look at the grief. It's never too late to unpack it or process it. I worked in adoption for many years, and I worked with birth parents and adoptees, and I would work with women in their 80s coming, birth parents who placed their child for adoption, coming to talk about their grief in their 80s because there wasn't the support when they were pregnant and younger. So, and what that brought to them in their lives to be able to tell someone. And sometimes I was the only person, or the other counsellors on the team were the only people they'd ever shared that with.
Wow.
So that's powerful. I mean, that's amazing. And for people to do that, and that's why it's never too late.
And going back to that ritual coping mechanism that you talked about, I've definitely seen that in my life, where honoring the person's birthday, remembering certain dates, can you do too much? Can they get too obsessed with overthinking about that person and putting too many dates in the diary? Can that be a blocker rather than what it's meant to be, a freeing experience and a sort of honoring experience to keep that relationship alive with that person?
I guess I see it as respect for whatever the person needs to do, they need to do. And whatever feels right for them, feels right for them. And I think what can be an aspect of risk is if it's affecting their life, if they can't, if it's impacting their living, then you'd address that. But if it's actually supporting them in their relationship with their person who has died, then to respect and support that. And that can turn up differently for everyone. It has their own individual way of honouring their person. And sometimes through counselling, people get permission to do that because they might have superstitions, or they might have no idea of what is okay and what isn't okay. And it's not my place to say that's not right or isn't, or society's. What's really important is to see what matters to the person, what's of value to the person, what helps them connect with their person that's died, and what would be helpful for them to manage their grief.
Okay. And thinking of religion, think what you may of religion, does it naturally give you some framework for introducing the rituals, like the funeral itself and these sort of things? Does it give you, each religion gives people something to start with, at least, and then they can spread out from there? And do you think religion is healthy to have in amongst, because people will get surprisingly religious after they go through these events, the sort of pleading and talking to God, these sort of stages, when they haven't done that ever before in their lives? Do you think it is a really good thing that religion can be in their lives to an extent?
And you say people go towards it. Some people go away from it, from their
Really?
culture and their religion, because they're angry. If
Mm.
I'm a good person, I believe in God, I pray, I'm a good community in the community, I'm a good person, and this happened to me. How can this happen to me? How can there be a God? So, I think we need to be very respectful, non-judgmental, and supportive of what people are doing in their grief. So if they're leaning into religion or moving away from it, if that religion provides a framework of a funeral and ceremony and rituals, if that's right for that family and that person, that's what should be supported. And that can change. Somebody can move away from their religion and then come back to it. They can go into it and move back from it. And we have also what's called post-traumatic growth, which is hope and recovery from trauma. And people often change, well, their lives are totally changed by the trauma and grief in some instances. So they change their lives. They may gravitate towards a different religion or a different type of spirituality or a different way of being, because they're thinking, well, that life I was living, I'm not sure I relate to that anymore. I've been through too much. I've lost too much. I want to live a different life. Their religion might be going to the beach every day. It might be, reading more. It might be making sure they have more holidays. So, yeah, it turns up very differently for each person.
Do you see anything, the amount of time that you spent in the field, is there anything that people can do to set themselves up to grieve better, do you think?
In what way? What do you mean?
As in either building a robustness or a relationship with death, or making the most of the people while they're around, because they will inevitably kick themselves that they didn't make that last call, those sort of things. Is there anything that you've seen that leads to patterns of people who just they get hit less hard when the inevitable grief, or you say grief might not happen in someone's life if they're so fortunate. But is there anything people can do to set themselves up to cope with it a little bit better? Or is that not a real thing?
I think, how can you prepare yourself for that? And then if you did, are you really living a full life if you're constantly worried? And I mean, grief anxiety is a thing. I lived it myself. You know, if my brother died, how can he die? So if he can die, who else can die? So absolutely but that has to be managed. That has to be processed, because that can take over. That anxiety can take over. Can you prepare yourself for loss? No. But can you tell people you love them? Can you tell people you appreciate them? Can you live a good life? Yes. But grief, guilt, regret, sadness, it's all part of grief. Even if you spoke to the person and told them you love them, 5 minutes before they died, you're still going to regret and have loss and grief, because it's a normal response to want more, to have been better, to have been more connected. We're human. So we're always trying to achieve a greater level of connection. And I don't think you can prepare yourself for that loss. I think you can help yourself in it, but not prepare yourself for it, because we don't know how we're going to be.
So if now the loss or trauma has happened, and before or after they go to seek professional advice, what are the best tactics that you have seen that work time and time and time again? Is it that talking to community? Is it that opening up? Is there certain things, or is it there is a different stage, say 1 week in, 2 weeks in, depending on where they are in their grief roller coaster, as it were?
Yeah.
Is there anything that you would tell people to be aware of?
Well, if I can go back to the last question about better, I guess I would not lean into better, because I think we're categorizing then. We're saying you're grieving good, better, bad. We're labeling it, and then there could be shame around that if I'm not doing grief well enough. So I think I'm very mindful not to lean into labeling it or success in grief. That's a really personal experience, and people are doing their best in grief. They're coping the best way they can, and they need to be supported in that. I think psychosocial education is key, that I mentioned earlier, helping people understand maybe why they're responding the way they are, but having those conversations more openly, having more awareness, and resourcing people that it is okay to ask for help in their support systems. It's okay to say to someone, I know you're really uncomfortable when I bring up this subject, or when I bring up my person, but I'd really like you to stop and listen. Would you be able to sit with me while I tell you this story? So resourcing people to go back out. It's not their job, the bereaved's job, to educate everyone, but there is a component around that about having your needs met and being heard and validated, and to start those conversations, to be aware. So, for instance, maybe the next time someone shares something with you, because we've had this conversation today, there might be a nugget there where you go, you know what, I'm going to pause with this today. I'm going to listen to this person. I'm going to ask this person, what was your dad's name? What do you miss about him? How are you doing? How are you going? Must be really tough. Just even a couple of questions. If you don't know what to say, even saying, I'm not sure what to say, but I'd love to go for a coffee with you.
No, you sort of alluded that we're heading in the right direction, at least, about normalising grief and and increasing that awareness. What do you think would help get us there faster?
Us having this conversation would help get it faster. I mean, there is a shift, but I wonder sometimes, is that shift because I'm in the headspace of this and I'm listening to content and I'm reading and I'm in this space in my work? And look, I don't even read a novel that doesn't have some theme of grief and trauma in it. So I'm hardwired to notice, and I'm an advocate, and I'm all about talking about this. So, I see a shift and I want to be part of that shift. But is there a shift? I don't know. I'm hoping there is. And in my work, all I can do is work with the community of people that come to me and empower them as much as I can to be able to go out there with their grief and not have to hide it, not have to apologize and say, I'm sorry for crying, or not have to justify it, but to actually say, it would be lovely if I could feel more comfortable to be seen in my grief. Obviously in their own language and not therapeutic language.
We've got mutual friends who are energy healers and meditation teachers, and there has been a shift from the silent generation, Gen X, Gen Y. Do you feel that the recent conversations that we're having about mindfulness and the requirement to label something as mindfulness, where maybe a silent generation didn't have the same level of distractions in their lives that we had, do you see a power in utilizing mindfulness to help bolster people in their time of need?
I'm not an expert in mindfulness, but what I do in practice would be very much about the breath, asking people, because they can lose their breath in the distress. If you've been through a trauma, to process that with somebody else can be triggering, and helping that person know they're in a safe space and the trauma is not happening again, but they're having a memory of it in a safe space. And I do this naturally, but I get people to put their hand on their heart or a hand on their chest, hand on their tummy, and really we breathe together. And that co-regulation of a counsellor and client can be really helpful when people are comfortable. Some people are like, what are we doing here? But, just helping them, saying, look, this can be helpful. Other people find this helpful. Would you be okay if we did this together? And just getting them, and I've got my hand on my tummy here, and just to breathe, put your feet on the floor, to bring the nervous system right down, because grief and trauma just send it offline. Like it's just horrendous, the physiological, emotional, nervous system response. And then the impact on the brain and the thinking and the being and the behaviors. So just even a simple, and that co-regulation, helping someone regulate in your holding that space, in providing a framework, providing that calm, can really help the person just feel safe and heard, and also have a tool to go out into the world. And if they're on a bus, they might just pause. If they're in a waiting room somewhere and they're feeling nervous, just to be able to do it. And they mightn't feel comfortable doing this, but they might just put their hands on their knees and just breathe.
That's really interesting. I've seen and experienced other people. It's obviously it's not quite journaling, but continue to write that, start a fake email address for that person, so that you can still communicate and send things. Is that something that you've seen, or are there other things like that people can do to keep that relationship alive, is the way that you sort of framed it earlier, and keep those thoughts going, and you'll feel the reciprocity there, I feel.
And that can suit many people to journal and write. Other people, their brain fog or their grief is too much to do another thing is too much. So really meeting the person and what they need to do. That's a beautiful thing, if you can do that. And I suppose it's about a continued relationship, but a new relationship. So the grief is around the person isn't here anymore. Physically, I can't speak to them, I can't see them, but having a new relationship with that person, where some people might talk to their person, some people might buy flowers every week, some people might listen to a song every day or every couple of months that really brings connection and brings the grief up. Some people write every year on their birthday or anniversary. There's a beautiful resting place in Sydney. It's a garden for children who've died, and they've got a post box, and you can put a letter in there for your child. So that's such a beautiful thing for parents to be able to do. And some people do that perhaps every week, and some people do it once a year, and some people do it whenever they feel like it. So some people write books, some people set up a charity and raise money for their loved one. So whatever it is, it has to be right for that person, and also right for who they are and their identity and their relationship.
It's so funny. I completely didn't make the link this morning, but my friend put in a WhatsApp group that he's going back to his hometown today to lay flowers on his mum's grave, and it's the year anniversary of that, and that's exactly what he needs to do. And it's a long trip for him, and he would have been planning this for weeks, but we're completely oblivious because we don't have that annual marker in our diaries.
Yeah.
But because of social media, because of WhatsApp, because of these things, we can keep in touch with that, and it's give it a little jogger to our friend group that maybe this hasn't gone away. That wasn't a month. That wasn't a 6-month thing. This is still going on, and he's still going through this, and it's
And
playing on
always
his
will.
mind.
Always
Sorry?
will. And he always will. And I guess he's put it on a communication platform that involves his trusted people, perhaps. I don't want to assume that, but is there a need there? Does he need something from you today? Does he need you to validate and acknowledge his grief? Does he feel alone with it? He might be okay to go do that trip, but does he need to know that you're supporting him? So I'm not saying you have to do something, but it's just, you ask, how can we be different? We can notice those bids for connection. Can you remember my grief, please? This is a lonely place. I have to navigate this, but can you acknowledge my grief, please? Can you be with me in it? So I think as a society, I think being more comfortable with that, for example.
I've got a really embarrassing confession now to show my immaturity, and this is going back a while, but I remember someone putting something on Facebook once about what they were going through. It might have been a year anniversary or something like that, and I was questioning the person of why they felt putting something on social media and putting it out there. But in my youth, I questioned why that person did that, to just make the world think that they're maybe a nicer person or something like that. And it's really a reflection of me rather than that person. But after this conversation, that's what that person wanted to do, had to do in that instance. And that might have helped that person. Or like you say, it might have been a bid for opening up a conversation with people. And I'm sure people that are smarter and more tuned in than myself would have reached out to that person and opened a conversation that they might have needed in that time. But that's embarrassing for me to look back on that now.
I think without shaming yourself, because I hear you shaming yourself on that, this is what this is about. This is about education. This is about, when we know better, we do better, So I think rather than I should have, now I can, now I know, now I can be more curious. Now I can be more supportive. Now I can ask about it. So, rather than giving yourself a hard time. And I think with social media, people are using it as an outpouring of loss. It's also, back in the day, you'd have the newspaper with the death notices. Now it's, on social media that somebody's person has died. People leave messages. So, and maybe putting it on social media is part of their ritual. I have clients who love to put pictures up and express their grief on social media as part of their ritual, as part of their connection to their person, particularly if it's a child. And there's something about that is about the continuity, that, and a reminder, this isn't gone away for us. You might forget, but we remember, but also a continuity of that relationship, particularly for bereaved parents, to be able to put a picture up and reflect on their child. They can't do that in the sense of their child isn't going to meet all those ages, those life moments. So why shouldn't they put it up every time they want to about their child? Because they don't get to do it in the memories now. Those memories are condensed. They're so precious and they need to last a lifetime. So thinking about ritual, it shows up very differently for people, but being curious about it is what's really important. And we're human. We can think, oh, that doesn't sit well, or, oh, I'm not sure about that. But to relieve that anxiety or uncertainty, maybe if we ask about it, we then get the meaning and, oh, that makes sense. Oh, okay. All right. I get why you're behaving that way. I get why you would do that. So, yeah.
No, brilliant. Well, Orla, thank you very much for joining us. We'll jump into the quick fire round, which it feels a little bit strange having done what we've done so far, but it has been brilliant. So thank you very much again for jumping on the podcast. But what book, podcast, or blog do you often gift people if they're dealing with trauma or grief, or even just as a personal one for you to live a better life?
I'm really mindful with clients not to push my own what was helpful to me. So I often sit, because then clients can feel like, oh, I should read it because Orla said, or I should get value out of this because she said. So I try and avoid that, but I do make recommendations. I often flick episodes to clients if I feel there's something in there that might be helpful. I noticed that I listen to a lot of Irish podcasts, and one of my favorites is Ready to Be Real by Sheila Shoiga. And the other one that I love is Niall Breslin's Where Is My Mind? And I love Georgie Crawford's for, it's called The Good Low. So those are three that I listen to quite regularly and in my personal life. And I find professionally they can be really helpful for clients. Books, I definitely recommend Megan Devine's It's Okay Not to Be Okay. And somebody that I really love in the area of trauma and is quite, he's very accessible to everybody, is Gabor Mate and his son Daniel Mate. So they're doing amazing work. They've written a book together, and they also do incredible work about normalising and talking about trauma and grief.
Ah, interesting. Sorry, you've made my voice go now. What was your biggest light bulb moment where you learned something about yourself?
I've had too many, I think. I think I'm a social introvert. I'm always kind of trying to figure myself out, like, because I do love people. I love being around people. I get energized by that. But I also need, like you just said, I need my space. I love to walk on my own. I love to read. I love to listen to music. But I do know that I need to retract in order to reset. And also in this work, I definitely need that. So just noticing. And recently, I've started to walk at sunrise a couple of mornings a week. Get up. It's torture to get up and go. But once I'm doing it, I just feel like a new person, and I feel so exhilarated and proud to have that structure in place and that I'm doing it. And that's really important, that I didn't realize how much I need more of that. And that's a light bulb moment for me to take care. Yeah.
Okay.
I think in this profession, you probably, the risk is not caring for yourself. The risk is minding everybody else. And I'm probably now at this point going, if I don't take care of myself, I can't do this work. I'm no good to anybody. So I think that's a light bulb for me at this point. But I've had lots of light bulb moments in my life, and I continue to have them.
Good, as you should. What makes you lose sleep?
Apart from perimenopause, and
which we've discussed via email, yeah.
Which we've discussed, which I'm accepting and learning to navigate, which in itself is an exhilarating experience and a horrible experience because of the symptoms, but it's also a time of change and transitioning. So the heat in Australia and perimenopausal symptoms keep me awake, and then the anxiety comes online, and it's irrational anxiety. It's to do with the perimenopausal responses. So I'm getting better at managing that. And I probably used to worry more, and I definitely found sleep a really huge trauma response to my brother's death, and took me years to reestablish a sleep hygiene pattern. And I'm actually sleeping great now and able to know what I need to put in place in order to sleep well. So those nights of staying awake are not as often. And if they are, it's due to being hormonal and changing.
We don't talk about grief. We don't talk about perimenopause at all.
No, and it is
in these conversations.
It's a huge life transition, and I think in the Japanese culture, it's called the spring. I can't remember the quote, but it's about spring. So I'm really leaning into that opportunity because I'm thinking at this time in my life, I've got so much I want to do, and I want to do it. So, and I need to turn down the noise and do it. So yeah, that's where I'm sitting.
Okay. If someone wanted to take one step towards living a good life, what would you tell that person to do?
I guess I don't want to tell somebody what to do to live a good life.
You're such a better person than I am. I tell people what to do all the time.
Who am I to tell someone how they live their life, or what's good and what's bad? Will I offer space for someone to tell me what's hard for them and what they're trying to figure out, and where they'd like to be and what they'd like to do differently and what makes them happy? Absolutely. But it's no way. That just makes my whole being just go, ugh, I can't tell
That's not
anybody.
your job.
That's not my job. Nor is it personally. Like, even in relationships, I'd be very mindful of not telling people what to do, respecting who they are and what they're doing themselves.
Okay. Who in your life should we talk to? Well, you're not going to like this question either then. Who in your life should we talk to if we wanted to live a good life?
Who in my life should I talk to? Is it?
Yeah, if you have any mentors or you have someone that's really impacted you in a positive fashion.
I have lots of mentors, and different times in my life. Like, I was thinking about my teachers, in primary school and secondary school, and thinking of a beautiful lady I worked for in America when I was in university every summer, and the impact she had on my life, and my aunties and my uncles and my cousins and my family and friends. And I just feel I've got beautiful people in my world that, I might connect from the past and the present. But currently, I've invested in myself with an amazing woman in Dublin called Kate O'Dwyer, who is being a mentor to me and with me, and helping me to expand my visibility and my voice, to do more, to help more people, to reach a wider audience. And Kate calls it the feeling stretchy, and doing this was stretchy for me. But she's clapping and guiding me and being a real support, so that's wonderful. But I also have lovely peers and people I can lean into for support, and because my role is confidential, I'm really adhere to that. But being able to speak to peers in a thematic way, or I'm really struggling with this, or I'm not sure what to do here, or I think I could do with extra resources, and somebody recommends a book or a podcast or a movie to go see or a course to attend. So continuous learning and support, and leaning into that support and saying, help, like, I'm trained to do this, but I also feel helpless at times. I feel like I can't do enough. I feel I want to help people and fix it and make it okay, and I can't. That's not my job. So that human response, I need support to be able to say, oh, I wish I could do more, and I can't. But what can I do enough of?
Have you always had mentors throughout your life, or is this a new thing that you've reached out to? Do you think that's really important to include and to help you grow from stage to stage?
I think it's vital. I probably am more conscious of that now, in seeking that and allowing myself to be supported, particularly in private practice. I think it's really important that you have a network of peer and mentorship support that you can reach out and feel like you're part of a team. But I think throughout my life, I've always gravitated to mentors, and mentors have shown up to me when it makes sense now. I needed that lesson, or I needed their support at that time because there was lack here, or there was something happening there. So, and our connected person that brought us together here is an incredible mentor. And that's very much on I feel it, and then I lean into her support. So it's not always scheduled. It's not always linear, but it's like, I know who to go to. So just knowing that in yourself of who you need to talk to, who, and people do that with me. Like, friends will call me when they need that support, and they know that I'm for this moment and someone else is for another moment, and being okay with that.
Brilliant. Well, Orla, thank you very much for coming on the podcast. Is there anything else you wanted to leave the listeners with that we didn't talk about before we sign off?
There's so much. We could keep going. This is a huge topic, and I suppose that if I'm if I'm honest here, which I am, is that, you know, I want to say so much. I want to communicate so much about this. But I suppose what I really want to say is, let's normalize grief. Let's talk about it. Let's be curious about it. Let's open these conversations up. Let's support each other. Let's not push away pain and trauma and discomfort. Let's be clunky with it if we have to be clunky with it. If we're not sure what to say, well, then just be yourself. Be that person. Be that support. And also take care of yourself. If you are supporting someone, you can't be everything to everyone. You know, you have to take care of how is the grief impacting you or their trauma. And it might be the best thing to say is, I think you need to go get some help from a professional. I think you need to talk to someone who really knows how to support you with this. So that can be a very kind thing to do, and also a self-protection, self-care boundary for you.
Oh, fantastic. So Órlaith, thank you very much. If anyone wants to follow you or head your website, where should they head to?
So I have an Instagram page at OS Counselling, and I also have a website, oscounselling.com.au. It's an Australian website.
Perfect. Thank you. I'll include all those links in the show notes and the description below.
And
thank you very much again for coming on.
Thank you for opening up this conversation. Thank you for making this happen. And thank you for nudging me to be here.
Thanks for watching it all the way to the end. If you've enjoyed the episode, please do hit the like button. And if you're new around here, do subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.